Thank you for joining us today. We have with us Dr. Patrick Quaid, who's an optometrist at the View Cubed Therapy Clinics in Guelph in North York, Ontario. He's an author, and we have another author with us today as well, Elaine Uskoski, who is an author, speaker, and coach, and she's a special interest in the areas of video gaming addiction. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
In your second book, Cyber Sober, you talk about a number of topics that are of interest to people in general, but parents in particular. Tell us the kinds of things that you found was helpful to share in this book, and particularly for parents who are having children that are struggling in this area of video addiction.
Well, I think what's different about this book than the first one is that my son was very generous and allowed me to interview him. And you know, we sat down on 4 different occasions, and he was very insightful, but also very raw and very candid about his journey through the addiction and into recovery, and didn't candy coat it. And so I think it's really important for parents, if they want to understand their child, because often we get so focused on the problem, which is the addiction, that we forget that there's a child behind that addiction. And generally it's a child with some emotional pain that needs some empathy in their life. And so I think it's important for parents to read the book so that they can get inside the mind of what's going on for their child and really understand them from a place of compassion. And, you know, I also spoke to experts in the book, like Dr. Quaid as well, and psychologists. And so it's nice to have experts' opinions on the subject as well. I think that's helpful for parents. And there's preventative tips as well as, you know, of course, the journey on what you do if you do find that your child is addicted to video games.
And Dr. Quaid, what are some things that you've noticed as you've worked with patients who have such a wide variety of issues when it comes to vision and learning and behavior and all things that you talk about, of course, in your book as well?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. You know, as I said, most addictions are typically escapist type behavior. So they're trying to get away from something that they're struggling with, and I think that's when Elaine says there's a person behind the addiction. I think that's so key to understand. And I think, and I have to admit, I'm not typically an emotional guy, but when I read your second book, Elaine, I kind of choked up a little bit in parts because, you know, when Elaine said that book was raw, she's not kidding. It is. You know, he really opens up in that book, and I think it's interesting to see parallels to what I see in general in my clinic, where you see, you know, in the younger years, the parents are getting frustrated because like, I don't understand why my kid's not succeeding at school. And then as a kid starts to get older, we all, you know, every adult was a kid once too. And we all remember what it was like to go through our teens. It's not easy in general. And then you throw these types of struggles with visual problems on top of it. And then I don't know why I'm struggling with this stuff. So, but I found a community where I fit in. And I think it's obviously important what the addiction is. I think it's more important to realize that as Elaine said, there's a person behind the addiction, and to realize what's driving that addiction. What is it that they're struggling with that's driving them in that direction? I think that's where the common thread between Elaine's book and my book kind of comes up is, you know, Elaine is describing, you know, the fallout and how you deal with all this stuff and how stressful it can be on everybody. And whereas what our book is describing is more, okay, here's where the root cause can start when that kid's in grade 1. Because, you know, Elaine, I'd be interested to see, like, how early did you start to notice these types of issues arising from a schooling standpoint?
Oh, grade 1. He was stressed from the get-go. In fact, I pulled him after 6 weeks from grade 1, and I homeschooled him because he had so much anxiety, and he was labeled as being slow. And, you know, our friends would say, slow? Has the teacher ever had a conversation with him? I mean, he's such a bright child to speak with. There was a clue right there. So yeah, it was early days for us in terms of Jake.
And I think where it resonated with me in the book as well is, and obviously Elaine was very gracious to invite us to put a book chapter in there on visual processing. So thank you for that, Elaine. But what was interesting is based on my own history in which I talk about in my book. I mean, I was in a car accident when I was 8. I was knocked out of commission for 2.5 years. So I kind of look at my history, and, you know, I was raised, you know, I'm a 70s child. As I had a kid in the clinic the other day say, "Whoa, what was it like in the 70s?" And he made me feel really old for the rest of the week. But gaming wasn't as big a thing back then. I mean, gaming was just coming out. It was like the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum ZX for those of us who are old enough to remember those. So I can easily see me going back in time and saying, if I was in a different scenario now, could I have fallen into that same trap? And the answer is absolutely yes. So I think we need to realize that different generations have different addiction behaviors, but all of these addiction behaviors stem from a point of pain, essentially, as Elaine said. If these kids are struggling with something, they're going to look for a group or a community, or God forbid, a substance where they can use that as an outlet to avoid the reality that they're struggling with. And I think as parents, the onus is on us to figure out where those struggles are, but we need to be educated to do so. And I think that's where I commend Elaine in terms of the book and being so open about what she's been through, because not every mom or child is going to be that open. And so I really commend you, Elaine, for doing that, because a lot of people would not take the time or the effort, or the, quite frankly, the painful process of figuring that out. That's not, I look back in my family history, and I wish my parents had taken the time to figure that out. They're good people, they're good parents, but I don't think they would have the tenacity to do what you've done.
Thank you. I think because Jake needed so much advocacy work from day one in school, I just ended up in that role of always searching for ways to help him grow and develop into the best human being he could be. And there were lots of gaps where I actually just needed to be there and keep an eye on things. And even with that, it still fell apart, and he, left home and became addicted. So, once again, there was my role, even as a parent of an adult child, to sort things out for him, because he just was so lost.
And I think what's interesting, I've got a really good friend. He's actually another doctor in the clinic, and he said to me, you know what? All you can do is do your best until you know better, and then do that. And I think that's what we have to continue to strive to do through the books that you're writing and the books that we're writing, is try to just educate people. Because I mean, it doesn't matter how many research papers I've written, it doesn't matter if I've done 15 PhDs. At the end of the day, parents don't read research journals. And I think that's why these books are so important, because I had 3 families in a row one day prior to me writing that book who very gently and politely, but kind of said, it's great you publish all these papers, but you really need to write for the parents, because we're the ones that are in the trenches trying to advocate for the kids. And that stuck with me for like a month. And then I reached out to Grant and said, I think I need to write a book. Because I'm so used to writing for the academic ranks. That was a very new skill for me. And I'm sure, Elaine, maybe you can speak quickly about like the pain of writing a book. I mean, it's a joyous process, but it's like, it can be a frustrating one at times.
Yeah, I would say book 2 probably had more frustrations, because book 1 is just my story, and the intent wasn't to help people with video gaming addiction. It was to help parents start talking about that transition between parenting your child and parenting your adult child. How could we help each other? Let's start an online forum and help each other with that. But the second book was more difficult for me, because there was huge responsibility in it to get everything right, and to make sure I was sending the right kind of messaging, and giving parents and caregivers the right tools that they would need to navigate this addiction. So not easy to write. And, as well, it's got to be written so that a parent understands it. You don't want it to come across as too much academia work in it that's over everyone's head and becomes dull and dry. So yeah, I had to sort of insert the story so that it still kept parents and caregivers' interest.
Well, I can tell you hit the nail on the head.
Thanks.
We've been enjoying conversation with Elaine Uskoski, who's an author, speaker, and coach, and her interests in the area of video gaming addiction have been very helpful for us to hear today. We're also speaking with Dr. Patrick Quaid, who's an optometrist with the ViewCube Therapy Clinics in Guelph and North York, Ontario. He's the author of the book, Learning to See, Seeing to Learn, Vision, Learning, and Behavior in Children. Thank you both for sharing with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.